vážené dámy, vážení páni a milí priatelia ekonomického myslenia a slobodnej spoločnosti. Moje meno je Gonda a za Konzervatívny inštitút Štefánika vás vítam už na 58. prednáške v rámci nášho cyklu Konzervatívny Economic Quarterly Lecture Series, ktorý bol ocenený v roku 2009 Templeton Freedom Award v kategórii etika a hodnoty. Ani dnešnú prednášku by sme nemohli zorganizovať bez podpory našich partnerov. Preto na úvod chcem poďakovať nadácii Databanky, ale aj ďalším partnerom, a to softwarovej spoločnosti Gratex International, IT firme Trinit, dvom spoločnostiam obchodujúcim s cennými papiermi Across Private Investment a European Investment Center, advokátskej kancelárii MST Partners, konzultačnej firme Looking is EU, Slovenskej asociácii finančníkov, týždenníkom Týždeň a Trend, internetovému spravodajskému webu Aktuality.sk, Slovenskej tlačovej agentúre SITA, internetovému denníku Energieportal.sk, Slovak Students for Liberty a hotelu Park Inn by Residence Venue Bratislava, v ktorom dnes sa organizuje dnešná prednáška. Dnes medzi nami vítam vzácneho hostia, vzácneho politického ekonóma slobody a top edukátora princípov ekonomického myslenia a slobodnej spoločnosti. Inšpiráciou pre jeho myšlienky a pre jeho dielo sú takí majstri, takí umelci tejto disciplíny, akými boli Frederick Bastiat a Henry Hazlitt. Nie náhodou, pretože práve títo dvaja boli celoživotným dielom nositeľmi búrania ekonomických mýtov a omylov. A to je aj dnes veľmi aktuálne. My môžeme vidieť, ako rastie podpora kolektivizmu, a to aj vďaka podliehaniu rôznym ekonomickým mýtom a omylom. A som presvedčený, že slobodná spoločnosť potrebuje čo najviac ľudí, aktívnych ľudí, ktorí majú základy ekonomického myslenia a nebudú podliehať ekonomickým omylom a mýtom. Preto dnes máme príležitosť si vypočuť na túto tému, dôležitú tému, aktuálnu tému, prednášku od experta na slovo Zatero. Pred jeho prednáškou mi dovolte ešte povedať niekoľko viet o ňom, ktoré potvrdzujú to, že je to expert na danú tému. Ekonóm, historik a edukátor Larry Lawrence Reed je emeritný prezident Foundation for Economic Education a je držiteľ titulov Memphis Family Center Fellow a Ron Manners Global Ambassador for Liberty. Bol dlhoročným prezidentom tejto inštitúcie Foundation for Economic Education a predtým 21 rokov viedol iný renomovaný think tank McKinnock Center for Public Policy. A ešte predtým prednášal ekonómiu na Northwood University. Larry Reed je autorom a spoluautorom 8 kníh. Medzi inými mám tu dve, ktoré vám chcem dať do pozornosti. Real Heroes, jedna kniha, ktorú si môžete prečítať, alebo najnovšia kniha Was Jesus a Socialist? Takisto veľmi zaujímavá kniha, kde pojednáva, ale neviem o čom, to si môžete prečítať. Takisto vám dávam do pozornosti zbierku textov, ktoré napísal pod názvom aj s ďalšími autormi Excuse me, Mr. Professor, Challenging the Myths of Progressivism, ktorá súvisí aj s témou dnešnej prednášky. Čo je veľmi zaujímavé a cenné, pán Reed je tiež držiteľ najvyššieho ocenenia Poľska, udeľovaného cudzincom. pod názvom Veľký kríž rádu za zásluhy pre Poľskú republiku. A ten udelil prezident Poľska za jeho aktívnu pomoc poľským disidentom. Takže on aktívne pomáhal antikomunistickému hnutiu v 80. rokoch priamo v Poľsku, takže toto je tiež jedna z jeho veľmi významných a cenných aktivít. Na záver tohto stručného predstavenia by som rád zacitoval ešte predsedničku Montpellier Society, Lindy Watson, ktorá v roku 2020 povedala o našom vzácnom hostovi. Larry je v hnutí za slobodu vzácnosťou. Vybudoval dva fantastické think tanky, ako som spomenul, a zároveň vyvinul program pre školenie mnohých ľudí z celého sveta, ktorí sa venujú free market, slobodnému hnutiu a ďalším, či už šéfom týchto hnutí, alebo ďalším zamestnancom. Píše knihy, ktoré sú naozaj jedny z najpopulárnejších esejí v celom tomto hnutí. Nespomenul som napríklad ešte 7 princípov zdravej politiky a veľké mýty o veľkej hospodárskej kríze. Čo je tiež dôležité, tak je to aj človek humanista, aj svojim ľudským prístupom k životu a aj Lindy Watson povedala, že je to človek, ktorý je úspešný všetko, čo robí a je to veľký gentleman, s ktorým je radosť pracovať. A nakoniec ešte uviedla, je neustále žiadaný ako pôsobivý prednášateľ. A vidíte, dnes máme tu možnosť aj tu na Slovensku ho tu privítať medzi nami. Ja som ho zažil v Prahe na konferencii Libertycom, kde ma opäť zaujal, pozval som ho a je mi veľkou cťou, že naše pozvanie prijal. Takže som veľmi rád, že je medzi nami a ja verím, že vy máte stíšené alebo vypnuté mobilné telefóny, aby sme mohli nerušene sledovať jeho prednášku. A teraz už odovzdávam slovo pánovi Reedovi, aby odprezentoval svoju prezentáciu. Dear Mr. Reed, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming tonight. I appreciate that very kind introduction. I don't speak Slovak, unfortunately, so I can only assume it was a very fine introduction. And I do appreciate it, and I thank also the Conservative Institute of MF Štefánika and also the partner organizations who have played a role in this event tonight. It's a great honor and pleasure to be back in Slovakia. For me, it's a third visit, with the first one coming, thank you, probably, I think it was about 30 years ago. And more recently, just a few years ago, and now for my third time at a wonderful time of the year. I was delighted to see the Christmas market open today, right on the other side of this hotel. Well, when I taught economics at the college level in Michigan many years ago, I started my freshman economics classes with a series of questions. I want to share those questions with you now because the answer that I was looking for is very important to my talk this evening. I would start by asking the students, what makes the world go round? Well, that's such a broad question. How can anybody know what you're talking about? So I would get a little bit more specific. I would usually then ask, what determines the course of history? What decides whether a people will embrace this kind of system, economic or political, or a different kind of political or economic system? What determines those things? And usually the students would respond by giving me different institutions. They would say, well, it's the media that makes those decisions, or it's the president and the government, or it's the church, or fill in the blank, a lot of institutions. Rarely would they cite a particular individual. But I kept pushing back and saying, no, I'm not looking for the name of an institution, because institutions reflect what it is I'm looking for. I'm looking for a single word that is really more important than all the institutions because it determines, to a great extent, how those institutions think and how they act and what policies and principles they embrace. Sooner or later, a student would get it and they would say, in a word, ideas. That's what I was looking for. You have heard, I'm sure, of the great French author Victor Hugo. He famously said that ideas are more powerful than all the armies of the world. Nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. Those are great statements that are tributes to what goes on in your head. Because ultimately, that process of thinking things through, embracing concepts and principles, has a lot to say with how you behave in your actions. It determines, whether you will embrace socialism or capitalism or something in between. It often determines whether you have a monarch or a legislature with democratic powers or something else, some other mix. It often determines a change in those institutions and policies, where people have a change in ideas, a radical change in ideas, but the government, say, doesn't keep up with them. Then you have a formula for things like revolutions, where the governments haven't kept up with the ideas of the people. So ideas are critically important, and I want to stress to you that they come in both shapes, good ones and bad ones. There are good ideas that shape the course of history, and unfortunately, plenty of bad ones too, and that will be my major focus tonight. I want to talk about some of the bad ideas that give rise to dangerous myths or fallacies and ultimately to bad policies. So if you want to change the future for the better, I think don't focus on the politicians. I mean, you have to do some of that. But if you really want to change the future and make sure those changes stick around for a while, work on ideas. Be persuasive. Convince people that this is a better idea than that one. Or we're doing things wrong because we thought improperly that certain things made sense, but they really don't. Ideas rule the world. Let me touch on maybe a half a dozen of these bad ideas tonight with a few examples along the way. One bad idea is a focus on the short run and a few people, instead of focusing on the long run or long term and all people. This is one of the most common mistakes made by policy planners in Bratislava, in Washington, you name it, every capital of the world, and in the people's thinking as well. The idea that it's more important to focus on the here and now, the immediate, what strikes the eye. Right now, even if what seems to be good for the moment could produce problems down the road. What I'm saying to you is, if you are thorough, if you are complete in your thinking, you will not focus just on the short run. You'll also ask questions about, okay, what's the long run likely to be if we do this, if we choose this idea? Okay, I'm sold on the idea that it might help somebody for the moment, but what about all people, and what about the long run? There are a lot of things you can do that may seem to be beneficial, at least for somebody, in the very short run, but which can also produce disaster in the long run. In fact, almost every policy, it seems these days, coming out of Washington, I don't know if it's true here as well, but so many policies coming out of Washington are focused on the here and now. What makes this group happy, whether it produces disaster 20 years from now or not. People are thinking too short term and not sufficiently long term. Take the man who goes to a party and for several hours he drinks like a fish. Well, he feels pretty good for a while, doesn't he? He feels like, wow, I'm glad I came. I'll have another one. He feels pretty good. But of course, we know what's going to happen the next day, don't we? In fact, the more he feels good at the party, the more likely he'll feel terrible the next day. There's a hangover. Maybe he didn't think of that. All I'm saying is, if you go to a party, just remember there is a tomorrow. And if you overdo it tonight, you may find yourself in a very bad situation tomorrow. Think of the long run as well as the short run. If I could give you a policy example, I love the history of ancient Rome. And I've done some writing on ancient Roman history, especially the period of the Roman Republic, about a 500-year period from its founding in 509 BC to shortly before the birth of Christ, about 500 years. If I could go back in time to say the last few decades of the old Roman Republic, you know what I would like to say? If somebody said, okay, you can go back in a time machine and you'll only have 10 minutes. So what would you tell the Romans if you had 10 minutes at that critical period in their history, when the Republic was shaky and it wouldn't be long before it gave way to the tyranny of a dictatorship? I would go back and I think I would stress this point that I mentioned about short-term versus long-term. I think I would say to the Romans, you know, in the last few decades, you have been pursuing a welfare state. You have gone from government simply protecting you, providing defense for the most part, a judicial system, courts, national defense, but now you have discovered that government can be a fountain of free goodies. And you're running to the government asking it to give you this, give you that, without any care about where the money comes from. And I can tell you Romans, because I come from the future and I know where this is going, I can tell you that you will ultimately bankrupt yourself. If you keep doing this, you think you're benefiting yourself in the short run, but you're not thinking about the long run. You're not thinking about your children or your grandchildren or generations from now who will be burdened with tremendous government spending and debt, and that will help to bankrupt your society. So you're not thinking of the long run. You're thinking of just now, what you can get, and not respecting the long run implications of your actions. Now that I've told you that, do you still want to do this? What do you think the Romans would say? How many of them would say, oh, we hadn't thought of that. Yeah, good point. Okay, we better stop doing that. Not very many, probably. And I can think they'd say, oh, well, okay, but hey, you know, why should I worry about that? Because the bill will come due at some future date. I'll probably be gone. So let the people of the future worry about that. Do you know that the great British economist of the 20th century, when I say great, I say that not because I liked him, I didn't, but because he had great influence, and not always for the good, mostly for the bad. John Maynard Keynes. There was an occasion, I think he was asked the question, Mr. Keynes, if we follow your advice, and government gets bigger, spends more, runs deficits, prints money, piles up debt, won't that mean that the currency will go down in value at some point, maybe even become worthless? And you may know what his famous reply was. He said, in the long run, we're all dead anyway. Which, you know, at that time, even the news media, they thought, wow, what a wise man. He really expressed that so well. That's memorable. We'll remember that line. But he should have been ashamed of saying that, because he was saying, who cares? Let's live it up for today. Let's enjoy things for the moment. And if they bear a price that some future generation will have to worry about, well, let them worry about it. Why should we care? So all I'm saying with this first principle is, be mindful of all the effects, all the likely effects of an act or a policy or a proposal, or even an attitude. Think of the long run as well as the short run, because they may be very different. A second bad idea that I think we see all over the world, maybe no exceptions, no country doesn't have this problem to some degree. And it's the best way, I think, to express it is the idea that government is Superman. What do I mean by that? I see people all the time who think, oh, we have a problem. Well, let's hand it over to the government. Let them solve it. And often they don't even think about the downside. They think, oh, if you got an issue, give it to the politicians. And the assumption sometimes in that thinking is they will know better than anybody else how to solve that issue. Well, sometimes maybe that's true, but it's often not. And I think we should disabuse ourselves of this idea that government is somehow a Superman, that the rest of us are not very bright. We're not very smart. We do dumb things. But the government, if we call them in, they will do the right thing. They will do the smart thing. They have all the expert information to do the right thing. And there's a school of economic thought that we call public choice, which has analyzed the decisions of governments. And the conclusion of the public choice school of economics is government puts its pants on one leg at a time like everybody else. And by that I mean that government is made up of people like you and me. And you and I are flawed. You and I have shortcomings. Why should we expect that people in government don't? And when you look at the incentive structure within government, you often find that the incentives are such that they take bad ideas, bad behavior, and magnify them because they put the power of government, the police power of government behind bad ideas. It's a big reason why America's founding fathers, for instance, told us 250 years ago, keep the government small. Don't assume it's better or smarter than you. Give it certain functions, but don't give it every function. Don't assume that just because it's government, that it will always do the right thing. Why would you assume that? And yet a lot of people think, not for a second, about the negative implications of so many government actions. So all I'm saying is be realistic when you look upon the government as a solver of problems, as a solution. Remember that it's made up of people just like you and me. And sometimes when you give them power, we find that what Lord Acton said about 150 years ago is precisely right. Power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I wish we could get people to think about that. That would mean a complete change in how they view government. When somebody comes and says the government should do this, we would then have a people who would respond, well, wait a minute, do we really, have you thought it through? Have you examined what the negative effects might be? Or are you just assuming that if it's government, it will always do it right? There's very little reason, given the track record, to assume that that will be the case. Well, needless to say, bad ideas can lead to bad policies. And I want to touch on a few policies that are seriously flawed. One of them, the first one in this list of bad policies, is one that I shake my head about every day. No matter what you think of Donald Trump, good or bad or somewhere in between, there's one particular idea that he has that prompts me to always shake my head and close my eyes and think, oh my gosh, how can he embrace this? Because as economists, we answered this 250 years ago. And that is the myths or the misconceptions, the bad idea behind the so-called balance of trade. Mr. Trump talks about it all the time. And he says, I'm implementing tariffs in part because the balance of trade with one country or another is in bad shape. I'm one of those economists like Adam Smith 250 years ago who says, stop worrying about the balance of trade. In fact, it's a non-problem. It would go away if we just fired the people who compile the statistics. That's how unimportant it really is. And let me give you a personal example. I walked through those Christmas markets today on one side of the hotel down the street because I love Christmas markets, especially in Europe. And my first stop was at a stall or a vendor who was selling various kinds of wine and cider and strudel. I love strudel, so I ordered an apple strudel and a glass of some kind of wine. I couldn't pronounce it, but it was good. And he was a very nice guy. Took a picture of him, he took a picture of the two of us, and I was very grateful for the purchase. However, if I were to apply the balance of trade concept, I would have to say that that transaction produced a balance of trade deficit for me, right? I bought from him, he didn't buy anything from me. And if the balance of trade, a negative one or a deficit, is really a bad thing, then I should have said, okay, thank you for the strudel and the drink, but now what are you gonna buy from me? And if he said, well, nothing, then I should get angry with them. I should complain. I should say, well, listen, now we have a balance of trade here that's way out of whack. I'm buying from you, you're not buying anything from me. But of course, that's nonsensical, isn't it? Doesn't make any sense. So we engage in this transaction, and afterwards, he's happy, and I'm happy. Right? We're both happy. In fact, that's the reason why people engage in trade. Because each person, in his own mind, decides that engaging in a transaction will leave him better off than if he doesn't. That's true for both sides of every free and voluntary transaction. Both sides to the transaction benefit, or they wouldn't do it. So it doesn't matter that I have a balance of trade deficit with that vendor. Doesn't matter. And anybody who would want to stop me and say, look what you just did, you created a balance of trade deficit, and I can tell you exactly how much because I know what you paid for it. I would say, get out of my face. I mean, I appreciated the service and the products that I just purchased, and the seller appreciated my patronage. I would guess that everybody here has a deficit in their balance of trade with Sony Slovakia, right? How many have bought something from Sony Slovakia? Right? It's a big company. Okay. Did they buy anything from you? And who is complaining? Right? Nobody. They're glad you bought from them. You're glad that you bought from them as well. The balance of trade is flawed for a lot of reasons. And I've illustrated the most important one right there, because it ignores why people trade in the first place. It ignores the subjective value that each person puts in place when he or she decides to engage in a transaction. But it's also flawed because it doesn't even look at all the transactions in international trade. It doesn't include services. It's just a measure of merchandise, of goods, physical goods. And so Mr. Trump gets all upset if he finds that, say, I'll give you an example, Israel sells more to the United States by some $8 billion. It sells $8 billion more in goods to the U.S. than it buys from the U.S. Okay? But nobody complains about that except Donald Trump. There are reasons why he says he imposes tariffs. Some are better reasons than others. But this is the least good reason to somehow fix the so-called balance of trade. You would think that when he says, I am in favor of reciprocity, he uses that term a lot, and I think it's a good one. He says, I want to treat other countries the same way they treat us. So he says, if a country puts tariffs on us, we'll put tariffs on them in some kind of roughly equal fashion, reciprocity. Well, as soon as he announced new tariffs in April, Israel was the first country to say to the United States, we will drop all of our tariffs on American goods to zero. Completely free trade with America, no tariffs on American goods. Now, if you thought that reciprocity was Mr. Trump's real motive, or primary motive, you would say, well then he must have then immediately eliminated tariffs on Israel, right? No, he imposed a tariff on Israel of 17%. That's not reciprocity. And why did he do it? Because he said, Israelis buy $8 billion more in goods from us than we, sell $8 billion more in goods to us than we buy from them. That's a negative balance of trade. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is an idea from the Middle Ages, from medieval times, when mercantilist countries were always concerned about the balance of trade. if they looked at trade from the standpoint of those who actually engage in it, who make the decisions to engage in trade, not some bureaucracy in government, but the actual decisions of those who make the trades that give rise to the statistics, they would have realized that this is a non-problem. If you really want a better look at the so-called balance of trade between countries, don't look at just merchandise anyway. Look at everything. Suppose a country sells 100 billion euros worth of goods to the United States. And so what happens? $100 billion worth of, or euros worth of goods come to the US, and 100 euros, or the equivalent in dollars, goes to the foreign. Let's suppose that was the end of it. If nothing else happened, who gets the better end of that deal? Would be the Americans, right? Because we get goods, and they get pieces of paper with pictures of politicians on them. Who gets the better? Well, what determines a nation's wealth? It's not pieces of paper. It's goods and services. So if nothing else happened, they send us goods, we send them paper money. I would say, I'll do that every day of the week, all day long, and be better for it. But of course, that's not the end of it. Anybody who sells goods and earns, say, paper money with it, they use those paper currency. Either they use it to buy from the same country they sold to, or they may sell the currency and buy another currency, and then use it to buy goods in another country. So the currency may traverse the world before it ever comes back to the United States. So, but in any event, ignore the balance of trade and look at things like the balance of payments, which always balances because it takes into account everything. If a country sells goods to you, but then it doesn't buy any of your goods, but it decides that your country is such a great place to invest, it takes the money it has earned and invests in your country, buying stocks and bonds, or real estate, or putting their money to work in factories and equipment to produce for the future. Well, that would show up as a terrible balance of trade deficit because those financial services are not included. And yet, isn't it a good thing if people from another country think that your economy is so good, so sound, that they want to invest there? If they decide, we could buy goods, but we'd rather invest because this is a good place, safe place, productive place to invest. And yet, that's often been the case with America. We have a balance of trade deficit with a lot of countries, but that's because in most cases they turn around, use the dollars they've earned, and invest in America. And we should be grateful for that. And it's true for any country, it doesn't apply only to America. So that's the first policy I want to point out as a source of great mischief, of bad policy. It causes people to say, oh, well, we have to do something to fix that, so let's impose trade barriers on other countries. And for a lot of reasons, that is always a dead end. Anytime you pull people apart so that they are less likely or less able to engage in mutually beneficial voluntary transactions, you will reduce their standard of living. We can all go back to living in caves and trading with nobody. But who wants to do that? Trade is a way in which we increase our standard of living, and it's every bit as productive as production itself. The second bad policy is promoted by the equality idea. And you get a lot of bad policies under the idea that government should promote equality, that it's somehow good if people are equal. Now, when it comes to equality before the law, I would be the first to say I am all in favor of that. That is a pillar of Western civilization. We often fall short, but it's a very virtuous goal. Equality before the law. That means the law should, like the blindfolded goddess of justice, who's holding the scales of justice, the blindfolded goddess should not peak. The blindfolded goddess should dispense justice fairly. It shouldn't take irrelevant factors into account when it decides what to do with you. It should not decide whether you're guilty or innocent of something based upon your faith, your place of national origin, your creed, color, anything like that. It should simply ask, did you do it? What are the facts, not what are the political biases? So I'm all in favor of equality before the law. It's economic equality that is a big problem. The idea that we should be equal or nearly equal in terms of the incomes that we generate in the marketplace or the material wealth that we possess. Why is this a bad idea? It's expressed in the following statement. In fact, I think this statement is so important, I would encourage you not only to write it down, but to sear it in your memory, put it on a bumper sticker and put it on your car, put it on a sign or a magnet and put it on your refrigerator so that your kids will see it as they grow up. And it goes like this. Free people are not equal. And equal people are not free. Now again, I'm using this in an economic context. Free people are not going to be economically equal. But an equal people, people who are equal economically, are not going to be a free people. Let me explain this. I'll take this statement in its two sections, its two halves. First, free people are not equal. Have you ever noticed how different each of us is from everybody else? If I came here from another planet, there was a report I saw today in the news indicating that there have been some visitations from other planets. You know, this is an ongoing thing. Are there UFOs and do they come from another planet? Something came out today indicating it's more evidence that maybe there are. I don't know. But if I came from another planet and my mission was to find out what are these human beings like, and I had to report back to describe human beings, I think the first thing I would say is, they're all different. There's 8 billion of them, and no two are alike. And there's no evidence that any two people who have ever lived have been precisely identical. Isn't that amazing? How can you have that many different collections of cells and all the other things that make us up? That's the first thing I would say. This has profound implications. When you realize this, that it's the number one most important description of human beings, our differences, our uniqueness one from another, then certain things follow from it. You then, I think, are led inevitably to the notion that, well, we have to let people be free to a great extent, unless they harm another person, but if they don't, we should let them be themselves, be free, because they're so different. If we were all the same, I don't think you'd have a case for freedom, right? You'd just have a case for a wise programmer who will wind us up and tell us all precisely what to do. But that's not the way we were created. We are different. So in order to be fully you, to be the unique individual you are, never to be repeated again, I would say, well, you have to have considerable freedom. And when you have that freedom, you're not going to generate the same return in the marketplace. People are so different. We're different in terms of the talents that we have, right? In fact, some people don't really apply their talents very well, or they don't discover what their best talent is, maybe until very late in life. How many here have eaten a product made from the Kellogg Company in Battle Creek, Michigan? Right? Everybody knows Kellogg, right? Cornflakes, all kinds of stuff. I don't know if you know anything about the origin of it, but it's a great story that I'll condense here for you. There were 2 brothers in the late 19th century in Battle Creek, Michigan. One was considered by the local people as extremely bright. He went on to become a doctor. The other one, the younger brother, he was, people thought, not very smart. And the general view was that he wouldn't go very far. He probably will end up working for his older brother. The older brother was named Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. The younger brother was Will Kellogg. Will was the one that people thought, nice guy, but not likely to go very far. Well, he surprised the world. Will Kellogg went to work in his brother's hospital for 25 years. He worked for his brother as people expected that he would. And his job was to prepare the breakfast food for the patients. And his brother had worked up this elaborate formula that he thought was very healthy for the patients. And it involved Will coming in the night before and mixing all this stuff up and then keeping it covered so it wouldn't dry out. And then coming in the morning, take the cover off, roll it out, cut it up in squares, and serve it in bowls to the patients. 25 years of doing this, again, with people who knew him expecting nothing much to come from him. One night, he forgot to cover it. And it was an especially hot night. When he came in the next morning, he discovered it all dried out. And when he ran the rolling pin over the stuff, it just flaked up. And he thought, oh my gosh, what else can I give them? And so he put those dried flakes in a bowl and served them for breakfast, hoping that the patients wouldn't complain. And it turned out they loved it. They started saying things like, why don't you do it like that every day? It's so much, we like the crunch. This is better. Quit making it that old way. And that's when Will went to his older brother. And he said, John, we got an incredible opportunity here. Nobody is selling anything like this in the marketplace. In fact, there was no ready-to-eat breakfast cereal in a box on any market shelf anywhere at this time. So this was a brand new thing. And Will said, we need to market this. Not only are the patients asking for it when they leave, they want to buy it and take it home with them. Lots of other people will buy it. But John Harvey, he was not very entrepreneurial. And he refused. He said, no, you messed it up. It's supposed to be just for the patients here anyway. I'm not going to do anything like what you're suggesting. Will begged him day after day. And finally, in his late 40s, after working for his brother for 25 years, he decides he's going to leave and start a business because he knows people will buy these dried flakes in a box. He doesn't have a whole lot of money at first. So he has to decide, what is he going to invest his money in? Will it be corn flakes or oat flakes or some other grain? He has to just pick one. He decides on corn. And so he starts marketing Kellogg's corn flakes. And they sell like crazy. And he grows, he's serving the entire Midwest in the United States until a man says to him, if you want to take this across the country, and maybe even overseas, you've got to sell your cornflakes in the New York City market. Because then you'll get so big, you'll get the attention of the Madison Avenue advertisers, and they may take you on and help you sell all over the world. But Will had to come up with some kind of marketing ploy. How do you get New Yorkers, who are notorious for their bad manners, you might say? They probably at first thought, what's this stuff from the Midwest, this hayseed, this hick from the Midwest trying to sell us this dried stuff in a box? He had to come up with a marketing program that would convince New Yorkers to buy the stuff. Well, it turns out, here he is, nearly 50 years of age, and he's a marketing genius. He comes up with a slogan that defines his campaign in New York City. It goes like this: Wednesday is Wake Day in New York. That's the idea. Wednesday is wake, like you wake with your eye. Wake Day in New York. What did he mean by that? He went around all the grocers in New York City and he said, I'll provide the signs that tell the housewives who come into your store what they have to do. But it goes like this: if a housewife comes into your store and buys a box of, if she comes into the store and she winks at you, she gets a free box of Kellogg's cornflakes. Now this is like 1880 America, and a woman doesn't wink at a man who's not her husband. This was a little bit risque for the time, but New York City housewives loved it. And he sold box loads, train loads of Kellogg's cornflakes in New York City, and that produced the kind of income that he then invested so he could sell Kellogg's cornflakes all over the world. Now, what's the point of that story? Well, here's a guy, nearly 50 years of age, who it turns out had a talent that he didn't even know that he had. He could market, he could sell stuff. He knew how to hit hot buttons in people and get them to buy something that they previously had never even heard of. So I use that as an example of sometimes how people have talents they don't even discover until late in life. And that alone by itself would have to produce differences in incomes, economic incomes in the marketplace. If you have talents but you never discover them or never put them to good use, don't expect your income to go through the roof. But if you're like a Will Kellogg who is alert finally to a talent that he had, you might enjoy great success. But for that reason alone, the fact that our talents are different and we don't always know what they are, that will produce differences in economic income. Why should we expect everybody to earn the same, regardless of their contributions to the marketplace? That's ridiculous. When I see differences in income, unless they're the result of getting special favors from, say, government or asking government to disadvantage the competition, I don't like that kind of thing, but if it's the result of your decisions to serve customers, your wise management abilities that allowed you to grow a company and attract ever more customers, I celebrate that. It doesn't bother me. I rejoice because I say that person is really putting his or her unique talents to good use. So talent is one reason of many why we must expect differences in income. Another reason is our willingness to work. Doesn't that differ from one person to another? Your willingness to work? Some people work hard, harder than others. Some people work, it seems, almost 24 hours a day. Every waking moment, they're at work. And yeah, it doesn't guarantee success, but it helps a lot, doesn't it? It certainly helps more than an attitude of, I don't want to work. That is not a formula for success most of the time. So we are different in terms of our willingness to work, and that is reflected in the different incomes we earn in the marketplace. And a third reason for differences, unequal incomes, is our savings. If tonight the government of Slovakia were to somehow flip a switch and make every person in the country economically equal, so your income is the same as everyone else, doesn't matter what you do. Your material wealth is the same as everyone else's. If somehow they could flip a switch and make that happen, how long do you think it would last? I would say maybe until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Because some people would save it, and some people would spend it. Right? You'd have economic inequality very quickly. So it's kind of illusory. It's an illusion to think you can make people what essentially they're not by nature. They're not equal. But the second part of that phrase, equal people are not free, I think is more telling. Equal people, economically, are not free. If you came to me and said, Mr. Reed, I've just been to a country where everybody's equal. A good socialist would say, wow, sounds like heaven. Everybody's equal. I would say, if I didn't know anything else about that country, I would say, you have been to a very unfree place. How would I know that? Let's suppose I'm the emperor, and my job is to, let's say I select all of you. Your jobs is to go out and make everybody equal economically. And at the end of the year, you'll report back to me as the emperor and tell me how you did. But your job is to make people equal economically. How are you going to do it? Are you going to just give speeches about it? Just tell people, oh, you should not earn more than the next person. We should all be the same. How successful do you think you'll be? Most people will laugh at you. But if you're going to have any chance to be successful at making people equal, my point is, you will have to use guns. You will have to tell other people, don't earn more than the next guy. Don't be there first with a better idea. Don't make a product that serves customers better than anybody else's. Don't do anything that's different from other people because you might earn different incomes. You'd have to do it by force, and even then you'd just drive people underground. They'd find ways to be unequal anyway. but they just wouldn't tell you about it. And you'd create a vast underground black market instead of creating economic equality. So I think it's more important that we focus on opportunity, freedom of opportunity for people, rather than trying to make them equal. And then if you have a society where people are free to do their thing and to be themselves, then celebrate the results, even if it means that some people are more productive, they create more wealth than others. Don't get hung up on this equality thing. It will lead you in very destructive directions. Now, I know I need to work towards a conclusion here, and I have more other policies to mention than I have time for. Let me move on to this one, okay? And then we should break for questions at what, about 7? Is that good?
You have time.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I guess I talked more than I thought I would on those other ones. But I do want to leave you with a few words about this, this other bad idea. And I hope it doesn't matter what your particular faith may be. I'm sure we have an audience here of 100. There are people of more than one faith. There are probably people here of no faith. That's fine. I'm not here to criticize it, but I do think all of us, regardless of our faith, should understand the faiths of the world and know more about what they believe in and what they practice. And the bad idea that I want to finally close on is the idea in the title of one of the books that Peter mentioned, that Jesus was a socialist. Have you heard that before, anybody? Oh yeah, I hear it all the time. Mr. Mamdani, who just won the mayor's race in New York City, is a socialist, and he often says this. He thinks that by promoting socialism, he's advancing Christianity, that Jesus himself would be a socialist. So what do we say about this? Do we say, oh yeah, probably was, but you know, so therefore we have to be socialists? Or should we just say, dismiss it as irrelevant? No, I think we should look at what the New Testament actually says and what the words of Jesus themselves are. Did he promote the ethics or the economics of socialism? And I can tell you from having scoured the New Testament that he was anything but a socialist. Now, a lot rests upon how we define socialism, right? Some people have this fantasy view that socialism is helping people, right? That's as deep as some people get. They think, oh, well, it's helping people. Well, wait a minute, I'm not a socialist, I help people. So does that make me a socialist? No, that can't be the definition of it. Mikhail Gorbachev once said that Jesus was the first socialist because he was the first to work for the betterment of mankind. What? So if you work for the betterment of mankind, in whatever way, that makes you a socialist? Oh, come on, that's ridiculous. Lots of people do that, and they're not socialists. In fact, I would argue that under capitalism or free enterprise, we solve more people's problems than socialists ever do. If you look around the world, you find that the human traffic tends to be in one direction, from the free or capitalist countries, or from the socialist countries to the free capitalist countries. The human traffic is pretty much in one direction. Well, if you look at the words of Jesus, you'll find that the essence of socialism is something that he never supported. And that essence, in a word, is force. What makes socialism socialism? Is it simply nice promises, free stuff, helping people, compassion? There are those who think that socialism is nothing more than that. But a good economist will tell you, no, there's something about socialism that distinguishes it from other systems, from capitalism or free enterprise in particular. And that is one word, force. Because socialists, you know, they have all kinds of ideas, right? All kinds of proposals. Mr. Mamdani is offering all sorts of things if once he takes office as mayor. But how are these things to be provided? That's the big question. Is socialism voluntary? does the money that they profess to have or get to distribute to you, is that all free, voluntary, consensual? No. Socialists have a laundry list of things, not as tips and suggestions for better living, but rather as things they want to impose upon you and the rest of society. Force is the word that distinguishes socialism from everything else. It is, in fact, I would go so far as to say this: if it's voluntary, it's not socialism. You can do that under capitalism, right? But if it uses the force of government to accomplish anything like, say, the redistribution of wealth, or the central planning of an economy, or government ownership of the means of production, these various shades of socialism, they're not to come about through free will and consensual relationships, but by the concentration of power in the hands of the state. So if that's how you define it, then you have to look in the New Testament and see, is there any place where Jesus said, turn it over to the government? Is there any place in the New Testament where he said, let's go take it from the rich people and give it to ourselves or to some other group we like? There's no such place, not a word in the Testament. You all know of this famous story of the 5,000, the feeding of the 5,000 who came to hear Jesus speak. And they were very hungry too. And the disciples around Jesus were worried. They thought, how are we going to keep this audience here? They're very hungry, and all we have are a few loaves of bread and some fish. Jesus did not say, oh, well, let's find a neighborhood of rich people and take their stuff and bring it back here. He didn't say, let's go rob a grocery store. Let's go steal from a bank. No. He used his own unique power to magnify wealth. He didn't take anything from anybody. Now, some people say, well, but he was a socialist because he was concerned about the poor. And he did talk about the poor a lot. He encouraged people to be mindful of them, especially those who were poor through no fault of their own. He hoped that people would be caring and giving and compassionate. But he never thought that you should pass that responsibility or that duty on to the government. In fact, if he came back today and spoke to us tonight, just imagine, if he said to us tonight, okay, you know that I said to be mindful of the poor, now tell me, what did you do for the poor? Do you think he would be impressed if you raised your hand and said, well, I voted for politicians who said they would take care of that? Of course not. I think he would say, what? I told you to do something for the poor. Did you produce anything? Did you hire them? Did you give them some charity out of the goodness of your heart? Or did you just say, oh, let the politicians do it? I didn't tell you that. I don't think he would be impressed with you. I would think he might even go further and to say, when did I tell you that you could hire the government to rob Peter to pay Paul in the name of poverty fighting? He never said anything like that. He told about 40 parables, but about 3 of them have strong economic content. For instance, how many have heard of the parable of the Good Samaritan? Yeah, very common. A man is walking along a road and he comes upon another man who's been beaten and robbed. He's in bad shape, laying along the road there. What does the man we know as the Good Samaritan do? Well, I can tell you first what he doesn't do. He doesn't say to the man, oh, you're in bad shape. There's got to be a government program for you. Bye. He doesn't say, well, I'll put a word in for you when I see the emperor. No. He pitches in and helps the man of his own free will and with his own resources. That's why we call him a good Samaritan. If he did any of those other things, if he just left the man there and said, there's a program for you, we would not know him today as the Good Samaritan. We would think of him as the good-for-nothing Samaritan. Another parable that Jesus told was the parable of the talents. And according to the story he tells, there's a man who owns an estate of some kind. He's going to leave for a time, and he brings 3 of his workers together and he says, I'm going to give each of you some of my wealth in different amounts, by the way, it's not equal. But he's going to trust them with his wealth while he's away, and when he comes back, he says, we'll get together again, and you can tell me what you did with it. And as Jesus tells the story, the man eventually comes back. He calls those three people together, and he says to the first man, what did you do with what I trusted you with? And this man says, oh, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, I buried it in the backyard. And I still have it, so I have just as much as you trusted me with. I took good care of it. What's the man's response in Jesus' parable? He's angry at the man. He said, what? You didn't do anything with it? Oh, the heck with you. And then he asked the second man, what did you do with what I trusted you with? And that man says, oh, I put it to work. I did so well with it. I have 3 times as much as what you trusted me with. Well, Jesus has the owner of the estate praise the second man. Wow, you know how to create wealth. Good for you. You don't expect a socialist to ever say that. And then he says to the third man, what did you do? And the third man says, oh, forget these other 2 guys. In my case, I have 10 times as much as what you trusted me with. I was a good investor. I was a smart entrepreneur. I magnified wealth. Jesus doesn't say, or doesn't have the estate owner say, oh, you greedy guy. Oh my gosh, you ripped somebody off, or you exploited somebody. No, he praises the third man, even more than the second. And he says, now let's take the money from the first guy who buried it in the backyard and give it to this third guy because he knows how to create wealth. If Jesus were a socialist, do you think he would he would speak that parable? I don't think so. The point there is what you do with your wealth it is far more important than how much you've got. And of course, when it comes to whether or not you're going to go to heaven, Jesus never said that that question will be decided by the size of your bank account. He never said anything like that. Some people say, well, what about the time that he drove the money changers from the temple? Doesn't that suggest that he, I forgot the third parable, but I'll come back to that. Doesn't that suggest that maybe he didn't like people who were making money? But please note, where does he drive the money changers from? He doesn't drive them from a marketplace. He doesn't drive them from a bank. He drives them from what he regards as God's house. And there's some reason to believe that they were perhaps being deceptive and disruptive of the services. He says this is not the proper place for that activity. That's why he drove them away from it. He never drove them from a bank or a marketplace. That's why, for instance, if you go to a funeral and you take your banjo or ukulele or whatever instrument you want, and you start playing Happy Days Are Here Again, somebody's going to say, hey, this is not the occasion for that. Love your music, but don't play that here at a funeral. It's sort of analogous. You have to look at the context before you say that Jesus driving the money changes from the temple is some kind of a statement in favor of socialism or against entrepreneurs under capitalism. That third parable, by the way, was I meant to tell you was the parable of the workers in the vineyard. And this is a very important one too. But according to Jesus' story, there's a man who owns a lot of grapevines, vineyard. And he realizes he has to work fast to get all the grapes in while they're ripe. So he hires a group of workers to start the day, say 8 o'clock in the morning. And he says, I will pay each of you a denarius. 1 denarius, that was the coin of the Roman period at that time. I'll pay you a denarius to bring in the grapes and work for me for the rest of the day. They say, okay. And they go off and start picking grapes. Then at noontime, the man says, oh my gosh, I need more workers out there. I'm never going to get them all in unless I hire more people. But, half the day's gone already. But he hires other workers and he says, if you work for me for the rest of the day and bring in grapes, I'll give you each a denarius. And then there's a third group with maybe an hour of light yet in the day, not much time to work. He realizes he has to get more out there. He says to another group, hey, if you will work for the remaining hour of the day, I'll give each of you a denarius. Then according to this parable, the man brings all the workers together at one time to pay them. And what might you suppose is their attitude? How about the ones who worked all day for the same that the others got? They're not too happy. They're all saying, wait a minute, this guy, he only worked an hour and he gets the same as and I worked all day. Now, if Jesus attempted to promote any kind of socialist ethics or economics, he would express some sympathy for this. But instead, what does he have the vineyard owner say? When the workers complain, he says, it's my money. It's my money. It's not public money. It's not public property. It's my money. And I agreed to give each of you a certain amount for a certain amount of work. Didn't I fulfill my promise? Of course, they all had to admit, yeah, you fulfilled the promise, but they think it's not fair. But Jesus makes the point here that it's very supportive of things like private property, voluntary contract, and I think even supply and demand. Because presumably at the end of the day with an hour to go, and there's still grapes to be brought in, he probably had to pay more to get somebody who might have already worked for somebody else all day to go back out and work another hour. So he had to pay more for that. So, Jesus tells parables that have economic content, and not a one of them are sympathetic to the socialist enterprise, or the ethics or the economics of socialism. Well, I hope I've given you just a little bit of flavor of some bad ideas. If I were to talk about all bad ideas, we'd be here for weeks. But I picked just a few. I hope you found that interesting. And at this point, I say thank you to all of you for being so attentive, such a good audience, and we'll take questions. Thank you. Having a little leg issue these days.
Thank you very much for your interesting lecture. Now it's time for discussion. Nech sa páči, kto má záujem, môže sa prihlásiť a potom mikrofón poputuje v rukách mojej kolegyni k vám. Poprosím vás povedať, v akom jazyku sa chcete spýtať, aby sa mohli pripraviť na prípadný preklad. A prosím, využite čas maximálne 2 minúty na svoju konkrétnu otázku, keďže vás je veľa a určite mnohí z vás budete mať záujem sa pripojiť do diskusie. Takže nech sa páči, kto má záujem prvý, môže využiť prvý odvážny jazyk v prvom rade, nech sa páči. Igor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your words. It was very inspiring. I was thinking from your perspective, what is the biggest threat to freedom in Europe nowadays? Should I repeat?
Yeah.
Sorry. Microphone. So my question is, from your perspective, what is the biggest threat for freedom nowadays in Europe?
Thank you. The question is, what is the biggest threat to freedom in Europe? And I'm so grateful for this question. And as you know, we didn't plan this, so I didn't know of your question. But it's one that I often get, and I always love it because it gives me a chance to say the following. The greatest threat, the biggest issue in Europe, in America, any place in the world, is the same today as it's always been everywhere. Now, I know when people ask, what's the biggest threat to freedom or the economy, they expect me to say things like, well, it must be spending, or it must be debt, or it's regulation, or it's taxes, or it's opioids, or, fill in the blank. All of those are important issues. But I say, no. Every country faces this as the number one issue. It's the greatest threat to freedom that there always has been, or ever has been in any country. And it's the erosion of character. Character. And interestingly, character, your character, is the one thing over which you have the greatest control. You decide whether your character is good or bad by the choices you make. Character is so important that I often call it the other side of the coin to freedom. Freedom and character, two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And by character, I mean things like honesty. Do you put truth as number one in your life? Or do you run from it whenever you think doing so might be of some temporary advantage? Lots of people do that all the time. Truth. A person who's committed to truth, no matter what, who sees truth as a value in and of itself, I think is ultimately going to do better for himself, better for society, live a happier life. Don't run from truth. Run to embrace it, to defend it. A society that no longer behaves that way, what would that look like? That would be a society of liars, right? Can you imagine a society where truth doesn't matter to people? They lie anytime they think for the moment it gives them some advantage. They cheat, they steal. You can't agree, you can't shake hands and agree with them on anything because they'll break the agreement the moment you leave. How could you have a prosperous economy in that kind of society? Truth and trust go together. So that's one aspect, honesty and the commitment to truth that is so important to character. Any society that abandons it is in for trouble. But there are other character traits that I tell people to work on, things like humility. And by humility, I don't mean running yourself down. I don't mean that at all. I mean intellectual humility, recognizing that as much as you may know, no matter how many PhDs you may have next to your name, there is still an infinity of knowledge that you don't know. And that'll be just as true the day you pass away as it was the day you were born. What's the opposite of that? Know-it-allness, right? I'm so smart, I know everything. I know how to live your life for you. What is the most unhumble city in, I'll use my own country, what do you think is the most unhumble city in America? Washington? Yes. Very good, you get an A. Washington, it's full of people, maybe Bratislava is too, maybe capital cities everywhere. It is? Okay. Full of people who have a plan for your life, right? Even if their own is messed up, they've got a plan for you, and they want you to follow it. And if you don't, there'll be trouble for you. But if you're a humble person, then you realize, wow, I may be smart, but there's a lot I don't know. And so you tend to be more introspective. You look for ways to improve yourself. That's really the only way ultimately you can improve the world. You start by improving yourself. You have more control over that than anything else. So being humble, I think, will make you a better person. A more, well, let me just put it this way. Do you like going to lunch with unhumble people? No. Sitting there and having the person tell you how smart they are, how much smarter they are than you are, how they've got a plan, that you're not living your life the way you should, but you should do it the way they think you should. That's no fun. Unhumble people are no fun to be around. But other character traits, very quickly, are things like courage. Right? That's one of the reasons I have so enjoyed travels to countries like Slovakia, who used to be part of the old Soviet Empire. Because I find so many people of enormous courage. When I look back to those big changes of 1989, sometimes historians say, oh, well, they happened because of Margaret Thatcher, John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, world leaders. And I say, hey, they played a part. But you know, they really happened because of the courage of millions of individual people who decided that freedom was important to them. And they weren't going to take no for an answer. We should always celebrate the courage of people who want to be free. Courage is important. A timid people will not be a free people, not in a dangerous world. There are always people who will be happy to take your freedom from you, take your property, take your life, if they thought they could get away with it. So sometimes we have to be people of courage, and sometimes even put our lives on the line to defend ourselves and our liberties. I'll just cite one more character attribute, and that is gratitude. Gratitude. What is gratitude? Having a thankful spirit, you might say. What is gratitude but the recognition that not all the good things that have come your way have been of your own doing? I mean, think about it. You may be the best person on the planet, but a lot of good things have happened to you, even though you didn't have anything to do with it. May have been good upbringing by good parents, may have been good advice that a friend gave you, maybe an invention that somebody created that solved a problem for you, or saved your life even. Or it could have been an entrepreneur who built a business that gave you a job and created a livelihood for you. We are all the beneficiaries of the goodness of others, and we don't take enough time, I think, to smile and say thank you. Thank you. It's so costless, right? How much does it cost to thank somebody for something they've done for you? It takes a few seconds, and you usually can't say it without a smile, and they can't accept it typically without a smile back. So it's a costless way for both people to feel better and to acknowledge some good that just happened to you. And I'll leave you with this. You know who I think was the most ungrateful person of the last 200 years? Ungrateful. Grateful for nothing. Who? Karl Marx, yes. Oh my gosh, this is a great audience. You're getting everything right. Yeah, Karl Marx. Can you imagine Karl Marx going into a supermarket and walking up to the grocery store, supermarket owner and saying, hey, I just came by to thank you for investing and creating this enterprise and hiring these people and making sure the things I want are on the shelf every time I come. Oh my gosh, I know you didn't have to do this, but you did it anyway. Thank you so much. Can you imagine Karl Marx, from what you know of him, ever doing that? No, if he ever went into that store, he would more likely say to the store owner, you've exploited somebody. You're taking advantage of your customers. You're gouging with your prices. We need to put you out of business. How would you like to live a life of such anger? You don't have to do that. You can choose to be grateful when you recognize that good things happen and that people who make them possible should be acknowledged and be thanked. So that's the greatest step, that we lose our character and then we give up our liberties as a result.
Yeah, another words, I will be speaking in English. Thank you very much for your lecture, Lawrence. I missed the last part of that. I'm sorry about that. Except the very last one on why Jesus Christ was not socialist. And I definitely agree with that statement. However, there is related and even more important issue, which is our priests today are socialists.
Yeah.
Many of them, or in Slovakia, majority of them. So what is your view, or what would you do to change that on the top of what Father Sirico does or is doing in the United States?
Okay. Oh, great question. There's a passage in the Bible, I don't recall where, and I believe it's Jesus who utters these words. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I think that applies here. While I can, on the one hand, recognize and appreciate and be grateful when people decide to join the priesthood or become a pastor because they believe in the teachings of Christ, that doesn't mean that they know their economics. It may not even mean that they know the Bible as thoroughly as they ought to. So you just have to be very wary. So if you have a priest or a pastor who seems to be a socialist, educate him. Talk to him after Sunday service and say, hey, Father, may I have a few moments? Can I take you to lunch? And can I give you a book? Because your economics needs a little work. So I don't think you have to simply accept it because they're the priest. You should say, hey, just because you're a priest doesn't mean you get everything right. And I have a brain too, and let me tell you why I come to a different conclusion. So, too many people, I think, are afraid to do that. They just listen to whatever the priest says and never challenge him. But I think if you have a priest who doesn't want to be challenged, who resents it, who turns you away when you ask probing, difficult questions, I think it's time for you to find another priest anyway. So take it on as a personal assignment to find a socialist priest or pastor and open their eyes.
So thank you for your time, thank you for your speech and everything. First of all, when you mentioned gratitude, I remember that Happy Thanksgiving, it's today.
Yes.
And my question is not very formal, but I'll try to convey it. If we pay for everything in this world, and if it's true, what if the price for the truth is too big? How do we handle with that?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm tempted to say that the price for truth is never too big. But there are moments, let's say when you are under coercion, under force, you're not a person able to exercise your free will. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose a thief breaks into your home and he ties you up. And he's going room to room, getting the things that belong to you, but that he wants to have. And so he's putting them in a big sack, and he's about to leave when he says, "Oh, by the way, do you have a television set?" And you're thinking, "Uh-oh, yeah, I do have one. Should I tell him?" He'll just take that too. If you told him no, I don't think I could fault you for that. And why? Because the difference is you are under coercion. You have no obligation when people put a gun in your head to tell them anything other than what will save your life, so long as it does no harm to another person. So in situations like that, I couldn't criticize somebody who decides to tell the thief, "No, I don't have a TV," even though he does. But those are rare, right? That's not the typical circumstance in life. And so when it is a matter of your free choice, your free will, you're not under coercion, you have no gun at your head, and you have to decide what to do the right thing. Do the truthful thing. Stand for truth. Every chance you get. Every chance you can. Because it's a very slippery slope if you start down that path thinking, well, if I tell this lie, I'll get a lot of money. So I'll just lie this one time. First of all, you've set a very, very bad example. Anybody else who is aware of what you've done is not going to be impressed. Or if they are, it will simply lead them to a life of a very unhappy, maybe even crime-filled life themselves. So I guess my advice is still be as truthful and as dedicated to the truth as you can possibly be in every circumstance, even if there are challenging moments when you really have to decide, do I tell the truth this time or not? Those are rare circumstances. I forgive you if you say no to that thief. But in every other circumstance, stand for the truth. You'll never regret it. Wouldn't you like your epitaph on your headstone to say someday, "He stood for the truth. She believed in the truth. She defended it at all costs." I would love to leave the world and be able to say, that's a fitting description of me. I would be thankful of the example that I've led. And thankful that probably my children and their children and other people observed that, and maybe it made their lives better as a result. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Reed. And I would have a question about, would you agree that some trade restrictions or tariffs even are reasonable and viable towards countries such as China in sectors, for example, materials for military drones or electric vehicles due to the national safety? Thank you.
Yes, great question. I believe that the core function, the most legitimate duty of a government is to provide for the defense of its people, not only against peace breakers here at home, but against those who might come from abroad. So if you have an enemy, enemy nation, or a nation that looks like it might become an enemy, then yeah, I start to listen. If you say, this is a special case, national security is involved here, so we need some intervention by government, I'll listen to that, because I think it's important, an important function of government. I may caution that even if you justify this properly as a national security issue, don't tell me that it's going to be helpful to the economy, because it probably won't do that. It may make us safer because of who you are imposing the tariff against, but it's probably not going to make us more prosperous economically. Just be aware that the economic consequences are harmful from tariffs, no matter for what reason they may be imposed. But I think there are occasions when a country has been a bad actor, when they cheat or steal or have evil motives. For instance, I'm a great friend of Taiwan. I think I would leverage American tariffs on China partly to get China to leave Taiwan alone. I think that's a proper use. I would say to China, you know, one of the reasons we may impose tariffs on you is you're threatening a free nation, and we don't look the other way at that. So, and Taiwan's defense ultimately may be a factor in the security interests of the United States. So yes, there are good reasons, defense-related, whereby tariffs can be imposed as a policy. Just be very careful, because government, then you tell government that they'll make everything a national security issue.
Thanks, Sabachi.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I will ask a question in English. So my question is to something you stated in the beginning, I think, when you said that we expect too much of the government, and it's even truer now in America compared to its humble beginnings and the advice of the founding fathers. So my question is, do you think a faith and a religion has a role in people actually, you know, diverting their faith in the government to back the faith in the church? Or do you think that there is any hope in that? Or you think the economic reality will hit before we can actually get that sort of renaissance of freedom and of mistrust in the government? And second sub-question is, I'm currently doing my third attempt at reading Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Do you think that objectivism or maybe more atheistic tradition in the libertarian thinking has a role to play to save us if we have gone on the wrong path as well?
Okay. Yeah, two very good questions. Let me say that I think matters of faith are so important that I don't want the government involved with it at all. I think you should be completely free, so long as you do no harm to another person, to engage in whatever faith you choose to embrace. Separation of church and state. That doesn't mean that government shouldn't be informed by the sound principles that can flow from faith. For instance, I would say, well, government should punish theft. Well, the Ten Commandments say that, right? And I didn't point out in my talk, but I always like to point out in talking about Jesus not being a socialist, that he came to defend the Ten Commandments. He says that himself. The 8th commandment says, thou shalt not steal, right? It doesn't say thou shalt not steal unless you have a really good idea what you can do with the money. It doesn't say thou shalt not steal unless the other guy has more than you do. Or thou shalt not steal unless you hire a politician to do it on your behalf. It just says thou shalt not steal, period. And then later it says in the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. Don't envy. Don't look upon the wealth of others as something that really belongs to you, that you should take. Focus on improving yourself, not stealing from somebody else. So I think faith is critically important, but government should be hands-off and steer clear of it. I'm not certain if that answers your first question, but the second one, I remember more clearly, about Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand. You know, I have read a lot of Rand, including Atlas Shrugged, and as much about her that I very much respect. She was a strong defender of private property. She thought government should be kept to its proper duties of defending people against violence and deception and theft and so forth. But the one big area where I differ with Ayn Rand is her atheism. I think it would have been better if Ayn Rand had stuck to everything else and then said, when it comes to God, however, I just don't know. I could buy that. I could say, okay, that's fine. Let's talk about that. I'll tell you why I think there is one. But I understand if somebody says I'm not yet convinced. But Ayn Rand went a step further, and she says there is no God. You know, in other words, she knows beyond any reasonable doubt that there is no God. And I think she should have said, at the very least, I don't know. I wish she had gone further and said, I've looked at the evidence and now I have to conclude that there is. That we live in a world of intelligent design. That human beings didn't just come from nothing. Everything didn't just simply evolve out of nothing. There must have been a creator. And then from there you can argue whether that creator is the God of the Bible or some other faith. So I wish she had not made atheism so core to her philosophy. Now maybe you just can't separate the two. I understand that if you believe in objectivism, you cannot at the same time believe there is a God. I think that's unfortunate. I think a more sustainable, more reasonable response is in the area of the spiritual, I just don't know. That's fine. But no, I look around the world every day. I'm in awe of what I see, and I'm thinking, how could all of this have been simply an accident? You know, I don't know if you know the story of when Ronald Reagan, who was a man of faith, made his first visit to Moscow in 1988, and there's a famous story where at the Spasov House, where the Russians at that time, or the Soviets, would entertain a visiting dignitary from another country. They'd meet there first, and then from there they'd go on to discussions maybe in another building. But the Russians had put on this big feast for President Reagan and his party. Just tables full of all kinds of wonderful food. And in his remarks, just imagine, this a room full of Soviet leaders, officially atheists, okay? What does Reagan say? He doesn't give them a sermon. That would not have been good diplomacy. But he does say, and this is almost word for word, he said, of course I have noticed this magnificent series of tables with all this incredible food that you've put before us. And what does it make me think as I look at this? Well, he said, I ask myself, could there have been a cook? And he just left it at that. And what he meant, what he was really saying was, of course there was a cook. This didn't just happen. It's not an accident. It didn't evolve. Somebody planned it. Thank you. And that was his way of challenging official Soviet atheism, just by saying, look what's happened here. This isn't, an accident. So anyway, that's my long-winded way of saying I like Rand, except for her atheism.
Thank you.
Thanks for the lecture. It was very pleasure to. I was very pleased to listen to it. When I was thinking about it, maybe you were talking more about ethics than economics. How it interconnected in your thinking? Could you more elaborate on it, please?
Okay, you were right. I think, especially in talking about the last point about Jesus not being a socialist, that was a mix of ethics and economics. The parables that Jesus told really have both ethical and economic implications, at least the three that I cited. So it's hard to separate the two. Economics, per se, as a science, is sort of ethics-free in that a genuine economist will attempt to explain economic phenomena. But whether or not that phenomena is good or bad, or people's motives are good or bad, that's the realm of the ethical, and most economists would say, oh, that's a separate topic. I'd be happy to talk about it, but it's not the same as explaining the economy. I just find it personally, as an economist and historian, and as a Christian, to completely separate the two. If you wanted me to give a straight economic lecture, I could do so. We could talk about competition and monopoly, and make no reference whatever to ethical considerations. But to the extent they play a role, I choose not to ignore them, because they are ever present in so much of what we do. And even though we're engaged, let's say, in a purely economic transaction, there may be ethical implications to it. Some economic transactions can have huge ethical dimensions. For instance, the slave trade, which still goes on in the world. It hasn't been completely abolished, but 200 some years ago, it was big business in the world, and had been for hundreds of years. You can talk the economics of slavery, but how can you do that without also dealing with the ethical dimension? Because it describes a human activity that has, by its very nature, massive ethical dimensions. How do we treat other people? Do they have the same rights as we do? Are we empowered by some authority to treat them in a very negative, harmful way, to enslave them? So some economic issues are harder to divorce from ethics than others. But I tend to mix the two whenever it makes sense.
Thank you once more for the lecture and for all these answers. Let me go back to one of the answers. You said about national defense and China versus Taiwan, and the tariffs that in that case maybe, if I understood correctly, in that case maybe in the interest of national defense, maybe even tariffs might be sort of admitted. Yeah? But if we like really not accept tariffs as an economic tool because of economic freedom, so then what you are saying is sort of like excusing tariffs in some extreme situations as a political tool of political pressure?
Good way to put it. No, I'm really not excusing them. I'm acknowledging they can be a tool. They may sometimes be the only tool that a country, short of going to war, they may be the only tool that you, or leverage that you have against a foreign power. So it depends on the context, I guess, and the circumstance. I would rather not respond to China's threats to Taiwan by bombing Beijing. But if I thought that maybe imposing tariffs, what might prevent them from assaulting Taiwan, I would certainly listen to that. Now, invading Taiwan is not the same as if China were to invade California. If they invaded California, of course, you know, they have such lousy politics there. I might say you can have California, but no, not really. But I would say, yeah, Taiwan is not the same as California. You obviously have a national defense reason to prevent them from attacking California. But I think you can argue that when an aggressive power who seeks to dominate is allowed to consume another country, even on the claims that I think are specious, that Taiwan belongs to the government in Beijing. I think there's some good reason to be concerned that letting an aggressive power get away with that will have long-run implications that will backfire against us, that will work against us. But I simply want to acknowledge national defense is a good reason to at least consider measures like tariffs. I'm not saying that would be my first resort. I'm not saying I would like them. I'm not saying they'd even be effective. I'm just saying that's a better reason than what is often given for imposing tariffs, that somehow it will help our economy. Okay, and then at the end, if you give me just 2 minutes, I have a closing comment I'd like to share with you.
I can ask you, do these fallacies have anything in common? In your view, what do you think? If so, what is common feature?
I would like more time to think about that, but I would say this, having given it no more than 10 seconds thought, that yes, they do have one thing in common. These fallacies stem from not using our brains to full capacity, not thinking things through thoroughly. If you're really careful to think things through, to apply good principles to a proposal, then you'll probably avoid those fallacies. But if you don't think very clearly, if you respond emotionally or without thinking, and these fallacies have that at their root, you're going to be, you'll go in a bad direction. So I think it is important. What the common connector is that fallacies result from people not thinking thoroughly. Either they're focused only on the short run, or they're only focused on a few people, or they're not using their judgment properly, but they're not using their brains to fullest capacity. That's a common connector.
Do další, jak někdo má záujem, jo, jsem v středě.
English. Thank you for the presentation. One question, Mr. Milei, Mr. President of Argentina.
Yes.
His opinion on that political, economic, and ethics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I love Javier Milei. He is such a great example. That's not to say he's perfect or that he's getting everything right. There are some things I wish he would move a little bit more quickly on, like either dollarizing the economy or shutting down the central bank maybe. He may do that now that he has a bigger majority in the legislature. But he is unique among the leaders of the world today in that he does not embrace that second fallacy I mentioned tonight, the government is Superman. He's telling Argentinians, you thought it was Superman, but look what it did. You gave it so much power and it's ruined our country. We used to be one of the most prosperous in Latin America. Then we gave all this power to government, and what did they do? They cleaned out your bank account and walked away with the money and ruined the economy in the process. That is so refreshing for a politician to be that honest and to have a clear platform. You know, how many times do you see politicians who act like they really don't want to tell you what they want to do? They just give you broad generalities. Oh, I'll be good for the people. I'll take care of you. Or trust me, I'll give that lots of thought. But Javier Milei came right from the beginning and said, this is what I'm going to do. You elect me. I'm going to take a chainsaw to government. And he's pretty much done that. And I just think it's an amazing story, and he's a model for the world.
I will ask in English. We see a growing atheism in Europe and some places of the world, other places. Do you think it has something in common with the churches meddling with the state too much?
Yeah, this is another. All these questions tonight are just fantastic. Yeah, I certainly don't want to suggest that the church is without its own failings, whether it be the Catholic Church or the Protestant faith. The church has so often misled people, maybe with good intentions, most if not all of the time, but they don't know their economics in many cases, or they play on people's emotions instead of their brain, and they have ceded to government much of the duties in society that really belong to them. The church should be resisting every effort by government to take over the power of helping people. The church should say, that's our responsibility. You have a full-time job, government, if you simply defend us. Leave the rest to us. Wouldn't it be refreshing for a church to say, Jesus called us, not the government, called us to assist the poor or the widows or the disabled or whatever, the people in need. And we should do more of that, but so often churches have walked away from that, or they just do it a little bit, just so that, you know, they're not ashamed. But they should boldly declare that helping others is not a government responsibility. It is a private, personal, civil society, church, and other non-government institutional responsibility, and we do it better anyway than the government ever does.
Last question. You are?
Thank you. Only today, prominent CEO of a big Austrian banking group that is also represented here in Slovakia has wrote a comment on LinkedIn that Donald Trump's idea to promote a stable coin that is backed by the dollar is actually a policy to undermine the Fed. What do you think about this?
That's, yeah. I am not sold on the idea that government should be issuing a digital currency. I think digital currencies have arisen from the marketplace, and that's where they should stay. No, I'm not a friend of the Fed either. I think the Federal Reserve has been a terrible curse on our country. When you think back to the responsibilities that the central bank has been given in America since 1913, when it was created, the government said to it, okay, you protect the value of the currency. Later it said you will make full employment a program of your activities. You will iron out the business cycle so we don't have wild swings. And so that's what we told the central bank to do. Well, how has that worked out? Under the Federal Reserve, we've had one Great Depression that even later Federal Reserve chairman like Ben Bernanke admitted the Fed caused with its erratic monetary policy. We've had one Great Depression and 8 or 9 recessions. We have a currency that's worth a fraction of what it was when they started. If a private company had performed that way, I think we'd be holding hearings in Congress and demanding their heads. But we just kind of accept that, oh, that's the central bank. They are so wise. They'll know what to do. I have no confidence in them. And if I could, like Javier Milei says he wants to do in Argentina, I would get rid of it. And I don't think it's so. Then the question of should it have a digital currency doesn't, or should the government have one, is kind of obvious. But no, it should simply. I would like to see government handle money the same way it does, say, weights and measures. For instance, the government tells us that by law, a foot is 12 inches. I know you use meters here, but you get the idea. Or that a pound is 16 ounces. Okay, you know, you set definitions, so you know what cheating looks like. So if somebody sells you a ruler and says it's a foot, but it's only 11 inches, you have a right to go to the court and say I was cheated. So setting up the proper definition, but then leaving the provision to the marketplace is the proper role I think government should play in money, much as I think that's the role it should play in almost everything else. Set the rules, but let free people decide on the provision through competition and consumer choice. Okay. I know we've been here a long time, but I just wanted to close with a note. Let me ask 2 questions. One will be about you personally. The second question will be your thoughts about society at large. And the first question is like this. How many of you are optimistic for yourself? Okay, good. That tells me you're in charge of your life, that you're expecting to do better, even if the rest of society may not. You can make a better world for yourself at least, if not other people, regardless of what society throws at you. That's a healthy attitude. Second question is, how many of you are optimistic for society at large? Okay, it's always a smaller number. And I understand that. But I just want to leave you with this thought. Try your best to be as optimistic for both yourself and society as you possibly can. Try not to be a pessimist. And why? Because I believe very strongly that if you're pessimistic, if you think whether for yourself or society that, you know, the future is going to be worse, we're not going to win, everything's going to go bad. If you think that, well, two bad things begin to happen. One, you don't work as hard for what you know to be right, because you've kind of given up. You know, what's the point? If I know it's going to get worse, why bother to make it better? So you'll give up, but that becomes then a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If good people don't work for what they know to be right because they've given up, well then good probably won't happen. You'll be giving a license to evil. And the second bad thing that can happen is you will not be convincing to other people. If I came here tonight to you and I said, I want to sign you all up for the cause of liberty. I want you to sign a sheet that says, I'm for liberty, okay, and I will work for it. But if I said at the same time, well, by the way, you should know we're going to lose, would you bother to sign? What's the point? Why would you sign up for a losing cause? So nobody knows the future. Why dismiss it before it even happens? All you're going to do is make sure that the bad things happen. So be an optimist for those two reasons, because it'll make you work harder and it will make you more convincing to other people. You can tell them, you know, I'd like you to embrace these ideas because they can win the future. We'll be better off and we will win. That's a much more inviting attitude than, oh, woe is me, everything's going bad, and who wants to listen to that? So I can tell you that by nature, I don't know where it came from, but I've been an optimist for as long as I can remember. I remember my parents saying things like, oh, you always see the glass half full instead of half empty. It's a common phrase in the US. That when everybody else sees bad things, you're always thinking about, oh, how can I turn this to advantage? Or it's not so bad after all. There's some good things that can come of this. I always said, you're always thinking like that. I don't know where it came from. But it was confirmed to me in February of 1980, 45 and a half years ago, almost 46. I was driving to the university where I was teaching at the time in my car in the state of Michigan, a very cold, snowy morning. The roads were a sheet of ice, and there was a car coming the other way with its left turn signal on. And as I saw it coming, I realized, well, he's coming to a stop. He's going to wait for me to go through here, and then he's going to make his left turn. But at the last second, he decided he had enough time, so he turned right in front of me. And I swerved to miss the car and ended up rolling it. I totaled it. It was not worth anything when it was all said and done. But I totaled it, and it ended up upside down in a shallow ravine next to the road. All I had were some bruised ribs. But I remember exactly what went through my head as the, as the car was rolling. Now, most people you'd think would be terrified, right? I should have been, I guess. Anything could have happened. But as I remember being serenely calm, like, oh, this is no big deal. But what went through my head was, I'm going to get a new car out of this. And I did. So I don't know if I can say that in that instance the optimism served me well, but I walked away with just a few bruised ribs and a very good attitude about the new car I was likely to get. So, thank you, everybody.
Very good conclusion with optimism, with rational optimism. Thank you very much. Ďakujem vám za účasť aj za diskusiu, and thank you very much, Mr. Reed, for your great lecture and answer during this session. Thank you very much.